Amen. Well, most of you know or may know, because I've mentioned it before, I grew up in eastern Arkansas, Forest City to be exact, and all EPA people that are sensitive to that kind of stuff probably don't want to hear this part, but back in those days, 76 to 82, we burned our trash. We lived in the city and we burned our trash. Everybody had a big barrel in their backyard, and yeah, the trash people would come by once a week, but 90% of it, you just carried it out in brown paper sacks that you got from the grocery store, threw it in this barrel, and burned it. And one fall, as a brilliant 13, 14-year-old, I'm not sure which year, the trash was wet. And I was having trouble getting it lit, and it's pretty full. And so I got this bright idea to pour gas on it. So poured gas on it and thought, that's probably not going to be enough. And there was a little margarine tub sitting in the trash. I thought, well, I'll just fill that thing up. So I've got a barrel full of trash and gas on it, and then a cup or a little bowl of gas in it, and I've got a match. We didn't have those long things, and all that. Some of you know where this is going because you probably did the same thing, but the genius of a 14-year-old thought a little gas was good, so a lot of gas might be great. So I poured some more on there. I stood over it, struck a match, and to make sure that I would land in the bowl, I actually looked in. Strike the match, throw it, bingo, I hit it just right. You know what happened? Whoosh! All the hair on my eyebrows, the hair on my fingers, my bangs, everything just evaporated, gone in 1 second. It was quite an experience. And you know what? It's one that I have never forgotten. The thing about that I learned about fire and gas that day is that it can be very powerful. It can be all-consuming. And boy, did it burn up the trash. I failed to mention that. It worked. It worked really well. Burned up everything else, too. But can you imagine what I smelled like with gas and fire all over this part of me? It's pretty strong, right? Well, imagine if you were standing beside a scene where there's wet wood everywhere and the fire of heaven came down and licked it all up and burned it all up and consumed it all. What would you smell like? What would your hair look like? 1 Kings chapter 18, let's go there and look at a familiar story. Continuing our questions series, great questions in the Bible, and today's is a good one. 1 Kings chapter 18. Let's stretch our imagination this morning and think through what that might look like if we were witnesses to the fire from heaven. 1 Kings 18, verse 16. Verse 16, so Obadiah went to tell Ahab that Elijah had come, and Ahab went out to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw him, he exclaimed, so is it really you, you troublemaker of Israel? I've made no trouble for Israel, Elijah replied. You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the Lord's commands, the commands of the Lord, and have worshipped the images of Baal instead. Now summon all of Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who are supported by Jezebel. So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel. Then Elijah stood in front of him and said, how much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left. But Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of their altar, but without setting fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood on the altar, but not set fire to it. Then call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it and call on the name of your God, but do not set fire to the wood. So they prepared one of the bulls and placed it on the altar. Then they called the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, O Baal, answer us. But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced, hobbling around their altar that they had made. At noontime, Elijah began mocking them. You'll have to shout louder, he scoffed, for surely he is a god. Perhaps he is daydreaming or relieving himself, or maybe he is away on a trip or is asleep and needs to be awakened. So they shouted louder, and following their normal customs, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but still there was no sound, no reply, no response. Verse 30, then Elijah called to the people, come over here. They all crowded around him, and as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down, he took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel. And he used the stones to rebuild the altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 3 gallons. He piled wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then he said, fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood. After they had done this, he said, do the same thing again. And when they were finished, he said, now do it a 3rd time. So they did as he said, and the water ran around the altar and even filled the trench. At the usual time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you are Lord, our God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. Immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, the Lord, he is God. Yes, the Lord is God. Then Elijah commanded, seize all the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape. So the people seized them all, and Elijah took them down to the Kishon Valley and killed them there. Wow, what a story. So let's do a quick little background here. The last 3.5 years, 3 to 3.5 years, Elijah's been in hiding. What had happened was God had told him to prophesy that there would be no rain, there would be a drought. The drought was serious. The ramifications within that region were harsh. People died. Water was nowhere to be found. Not to mention that King Ahab was an evil man. Earlier in Kings, we're told that King Ahab did more to rouse the anger of God than all of his forefathers. He made God angry. He was disobedient. He loved other gods. And of course, his wife was Jezebel, who went around for sport killing God's prophets. So these were evil people during tough times. All the while, instead of turning to the Lord in this drought, the people, with their leadership, were worshiping Baal and other gods, primarily Baal. So when Elijah comes out of hiding, he goes and tells Obadiah to go tell King Ahab that he's coming. Obadiah doesn't even want to do it because he's afraid. He's like, well, what if I tell Ahab I know where you are, and then when he comes, you're not here? He says, no, I'll be here. And so the messenger goes and brings a message. And that's when we get to brings us up to the question of the day. How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. It's amazing. When he laid out that challenge, the people were completely silent. There's much in our country, in our culture, to be excited about. Having lived in Honduras and seen the generosity of Americans, we are the most generous nation in the world. We are the most generous people in the world, largely due, in fact, to the Christian communities that live here and reside here. We give more and prop up more than any other country, and I'm proud to be an American. However, there's some other distinctives about our culture too, right? We possibly get more distracted by idols than some of the other nations because we have so much. A few weeks ago, I shared the incredible amount of money we spend on plastic surgery. Perhaps you remember that. Much of that is that we worship ourselves, or at least the outward of appearance, and so we go to great lengths to prop up the way we look. And though we may not be worshiping, quote, this little bronze statue over in the corner, based on the way we treat the outside, perhaps we have some idolatry with the way we look. And we think the outward appearance makes us right with the world and right with God, but man looks on the outside, but God looks on the heart. We spend a great deal of energy around the idea of possessions. Have you been to a garage sale lately? I ride my bike on weekends, lots of miles, through lots of different neighborhoods. In the middle of the country, there are garage sales. And they're full. Why? Because we spend so much time accumulating stuff. We think the more that we have, the better we'll be. It drives our time, our energy, our resources, our focus. We drive up our debt so that we can have more. We buy boats that sit there for 350 days out of the year. We have closets full of clothes that we'll never wear. We spend thousands of dollars scrapbooking, collecting, accumulating. But then here's the real kicker. We spend thousands of dollars storing it in storage units that are full all over the country. Perhaps possessions is idolatry. It may not be a little bronze statue, but perhaps possessions is idolatry. I know it's not popular to talk about, but have you ever stopped to consider the impact of football around here on Saturdays in the fall? Fridays too, but primarily the Hogs. We're not the only part of the country that has rabid fans and loses our perspective. But think about what people will go through on a Saturday in a football game. By the time you take the tailgating and the travel and the food and the lodging, people spend thousands of dollars to come to a game and worship the Hogs. You say worship. Well, they sit around for 4 hours in the heat, the rain, the cold. They cheer and scream. They yell and scream and they holler and go Hogs go, and got the pig suey and everything. It's the same people that come on Sunday and complain if we go over 5 minutes. I mean, I'm not trying to be picky, just pointing out the facts that for many, their sports team is not idol. Do you realize the perspective, the difference in perspective? The only complaining you'll get, they'll sit, and I went to the game a couple of weeks ago, and it was set in the hot sun, had great seats. My brother-in-law invited me and went for the first half, and we were burning up. Not one complaint, except about the refs. There's a lot of complaints about the refs. But think about it for a minute. What a perspective. The stadiums all across America yesterday were full of Christians who are excited, who are worshiping with their voice and with their money and celebrating. But come to Sunday morning, church, the music's too loud, the pastor preached too long, talks about money too much. Want to go on a mission project? No way, I don't have time. Teach Sunday school to the kids because they need a teacher? It's not my thing. But boy, I'll put the flags on my car and drive to the game. Perhaps that's idolatry. Money, possessions, self-worship, sports team, crafts, and even religious activity. All can be idolatry and worship that isn't part of God's plan. The question to the people of Israel that day and to us is simple. How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. There's some things you need to know about idolatry. It requires time, energy, and resources. You will find it's a treadmill that you can't get off of. People who worship anything, regardless whether it's the one true God, there's something required of you. And your pocketbooks reflect it. And some of you go, I don't want to hear this. It's true. It requires time, energy, and resources. The pull never really ceases. It will take you farther than you want to go and keep you longer than you thought it could. You'll wake up one day and go, how did I get here? I've heard that with my own ears. Friends who've said, you know what? I don't know how I got to this place, but I don't like it. Some say, I don't do that. I don't have idols. But your pocketbook, your time, and your speech reflect different. It's an empty faith. I know of people that have bounced from one idol worship to another. First, it may be the almighty dollar. Maybe it's a sense of adventure. I've got a very successful friend that's climbed mountain peaks, trying to get that feeling that only God can fill. And then he's gone from one sport endeavor to another, one sports team to another, all trying to fill the vacuum that can only be filled by God. The sad part is, for many, it takes a lifetime before they realize it's not enough. For the children of Israel, they were on the fence, literally. How long will you waver between two opinions? Elijah had had enough. He was tired of it. And he knew that this idolatry had captured their attentions and their interests and their resources and their time. And he said, enough. Decide. Which is it? So here's Elijah's challenge. You call in the name of your God, and I will call in the name of the Lord. The God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. Why? Because they really believed that maybe this little idol might really work. It's an important test, one that makes us mostly uncomfortable. Do you really want to know? Do you really want to know? Do you really want to see God's power? Are you really willing to give him of your time, of your resources, of your energy and your focus, and put God to the test? Do you really want to know? Is God really who he says he is? Look what they did. They did everything to prove that the idol worked. They cried out. They were sincere. They really believed it. A lot of people say sincerity is enough, and I can get there because I'm sincere. No, wrong. These people were sincere. They were energetic. They danced all morning and all afternoon. And they even had some sacrifice involved. They cut themselves. They shouted louder and louder. They raved all afternoon. But the key word in the verse was, but there was no sound, no reply, no response. No sound, no reply, no response. It's a side note, but I love the fact that Elijah was mocking them. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe you should go wake your God. It's a little humor in what's fixing to be an incredible display of God's power. He knew that only God saves and only God delivers. At the end of the day, if your focus is something other than God, when you need a response, a word of hope, an inspiration, it will not be enough, period. If your faith is about coming to worship on Sunday mornings and leaving it at the door as you walk out, when you really need it, you won't be able to cash that check. It'll be empty. We sang about God's grace being enough. Idols can't deliver when you need them to. You ever wonder why people of Hollywood that have loads of money and fame and fortune find themselves addicted to drugs, attention? They'll go to great lengths for people to know who they are. And they're miserable. And they die young all the time. It's not enough. The rest of the story has some important things for us to consider. Elijah acts alone. After their shenanigans is all over, he rebuilt and repaired the altar. It said he dug the trench around the altar. He piled the wood on the altar. He cut the bull into pieces. But he had the people who were wavering between two opinions help him with the next step. There's a point at which, if you're going to make a decision, you have to act. He asked them to take water. Now, what's significant about that? It's a drought. There had been no rain for 3 years. And they take this precious resource, and he says, I want you to carry that resource. I want you to be involved. And he asks them to pick it up and carry it and pour it over the altar and pour it over the wood and do it 3 times until it's full. This is significant. It was not easy. It cost them something. Can you imagine the grumbling? Well, why are we wasting all this water for? Just like a church, wouldn't it? That's what we'd do. Wait a minute. There's something else we could use that water for. What's he doing? But the challenge was great, wasn't it? just in case you need a reminder, we as Christians, we need to take time out of our day at the altar of God. We need to prepare. We need to use our resources, and it may cost you something. If your faith doesn't cost you something, is it real? We need to prepare, and we need to praise and pray. Elijah acknowledges that God is the God who delivered in the past to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He calls to remembrance the heroes of their faith and their forefathers and said, you remember what God did for them? God, I praise you for that. And he prays that, God, help me to be obedient to your commands. And then he asks God to display his power. God's response was overwhelming. In verse 38, it says, immediately the fire of God flashed down from heaven and burned it all up. Every bit of it. Immediately. My experience with the trash barrel at the moment seemed huge. That whoosh as it singed the hair. Can you imagine display as God completely shook this mountain with fire, and they're all standing there? God displays his power all the time and has from the beginning of time, whether it's the early morning sunrise or the healing that goes on in the hearts and the lives of people all over the world. God displays his power. I believe he wants to do more. I believe he'd like to display his power through you and through me and through this church. So why is it we don't ask God to display his power like Elijah did? What are we afraid of? Oh, sure, we'll ask him to help us with our migraine or with Aunt Sue because her foot's bothering her, or we need more money because we've blown it and driven up our debt. Yeah, we ask him for those things, but when's the last time that you earnestly said, God, help me to see your power? What are we afraid of? Is it consistent to think that God, who overwhelmingly displayed his power to the children of Israel on that mountain, would not be able to do it today? Well, sure he would. That's who God is. That's what he's waiting on. Why are we not asking? He's willing and able to do above what we're able to think or imagine. The response of the people when this happened, it says they immediately fell on their face and repented and cried out, he is God. You are God. So what idolatry do you need to repent of today? May not be a Baal statue. That'd be too easy. What does your resources and your time and your money and your pocketbook reflect that your focus and energy is on? Do you get more excited about a little pig on a helmet that crosses a 10-yard line than you do about the grace of God that loves you so much? What do you need to repent of? What idol do you need to reject because of God's faithfulness? Elijah had all the prophets killed, every single one of them. Perhaps we need to kill some idols today. Put them down. Lastly, when the fire from heaven comes down, it's overwhelming and it's all-consuming. Those around smelt like smoke. The fire was huge. You burn leaves? We're about to get in that season, right? Last fall, the house we were renting just had leaves everywhere, and I had these big fires, and I walk in, and every stitch of my clothing smelled like smoke. Every stitch. Why is it that people, your neighbors, your friends, your family, the people you sit by at ball games, why is it they don't smell the smoke of God's fire on your life? The statistics right now are pretty scary. I'm not going to quote them exactly because I haven't read all of it, but apparently most Christians will admit that people around them don't know that they're a believer. Most people are willing to say that. Most evangelical Christians know that their impact is not great. Perhaps we are content not to see the fire from God because it's too scary. Perhaps we are content because we're still in the season that thinking our idols can deliver us satisfaction and joy and peace. They can't. Perhaps we're just afraid. Church, friends, Let's ask God. Let's see your power. Display your power. Why not here? Revivals have started all over the world in smaller places than this. People's lives have been changed because of one person or one family or one group or one church. Why not? God, display your power through us. If he's not, it's not him. He's able. He's able. Please, God, let us see your power should be the cry of our heart. Let's stand and pray.